A warm welcome to our Executive Roundtable on the lessons learned from a 5-year partnership with the National Health Services and Virginia Mason Institute. During our time together today, our focus will be on the lessons learned as highlighted in a landmark 65-page report recently published called Leading Change Across the Healthcare System: How to Build Improvement Capability and Foster a Culture of Continuous Improvement. The evaluation of this partnership was led by Dr. Nicola Burgess and colleagues at Warwick Business School between January 2018 and July 2021. The 5-year partnership included 5 trusts: University Hospitals Coventry and Warwickshire, Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital, Barking, Havering and Redbridge University Hospital, the Leeds Teaching Hospital, and Surrey and Sussex Healthcare. The report is calling for healthcare leaders to take note of these findings and leverage the lessons learned within the report to foster a systematic approach to quality improvement. My name is Wendy Courthouse Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of Virginia Mason Institute. Virginia Mason Institute is a nonprofit professional services arm of Virginia Mason Franciscan Health within the Common Spirit system. And we have a rich history of transformation and a vision of partnering with healthcare leaders across the globe in transforming healthcare. I am delighted to be joined by 5 esteemed panelists, and will ask them to briefly introduce themselves, their role, and their connection to this work. So let's begin with Gary, followed by Nicola, and then Andy, Kathy, and Adam.
Well, good afternoon or good morning. As it is here in the United States, I'm Dr. Gary Kaplan. For 44 years, until just a few months ago, I was a practicing internal medicine physician, and for 22 years, I had the privilege of serving as the chief executive for the Virginia Mason Health System and then Virginia Mason Franciscan Health. I'm particularly proud of our journey to transform healthcare. We are now 21 years of deploying what we call the Virginia Mason production system to healthcare. And it's been a real privilege to lead this journey and to work with healthcare leaders around the world. Our work in the UK began in 2007, and the work with the 5 trusts that we'll be discussing today really is something that I think will show a path forward for truly transforming healthcare. Nice to be with you today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Nicola Burgess. So I'm a reader in operations management at Warwick Business School and University of Warwick. That's in the UK. So I have several years of experience working with hospitals involved in service improvement. And I led the evaluation of the NHS and Virginia Mason partnership with the 5 hospital trusts in England. And I'm author of the report that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Hi, everybody. Andy Hardy here. I'm CEO at University Hospitals Coventry and Warwickshire, a position I've had the great privilege to hold now for some 12 and a half years. And I've been involved in the partnership with Virginia Mason since day one, really, back in September 15. And that has led us to creating and evolving our own management system, UHWI, UHW Improvement, alongside our colleagues and our send side from Virginia Mason. So really pleased to be with you.
Hello, I'm Kathy McLean, and I'm currently a chair of various things, a trust, a system, and a non-executive in a couple of trusts. So I've moved into the non-executive side of things. But when I was involved in this work, I was at initially the NHS TDA and then NHS Improvement, and sort of jointly and in various ways kind of oversaw and worked with the partners and Virginia Mason in order to bring about these improvements. And that was a great period of time, I have to say. So thank you.
And hi, last and probably least, I'm Adam Saul-Jones. I'm lucky enough to be the Chief Executive at East and North Hertfordshire NHS Trust. But my involvement with the programme was similarly to Kathy when I was at NHS Improvement, and I was the Director of Improvement there and oversaw the program working with the 5 trusts and Virginia Mason. So that's my link to the program.
Great. Thank you all for being here today for what I believe will be really a rich, engaging, and inspiring discussion. A quick note before we begin about our chat function. It's up and running. I was going to make sure to let people know, please feel free to drop us a line, a hello. We have over 500 people who have registered for this session for the recording, and not everyone can be here with us live today. But I've already seen hellos from Japan, Netherlands, London, a cold Bristol, Birmingham, Iceland, Arizona, Florida, Ireland, and France, just to name a few. So excited that all of you can join us today as well with this discussion. And with that, let's dive in. So I'm going to start with a question for you, Nicola, around the report. In the report, you mentioned the systematic adoption of lean principles and methods across the whole organization to become a management system seems to remain rare. So what do you believe is the biggest challenge to embarking on this type of work?
Thank you, Wendy. That's actually quite a big question to answer, but a great place to start. So in terms of barriers, there are many that we could talk about. And I think I'm going to sort of reflect on what I learned through the evaluation about how important it was to have a receptive context within the organizations. And by a receptive context, we mean a culture where the values are collectively shared and held right across the organization. So they're clearly stated, they're constant, they're consistent, and they are aligned right across the piece. And I think that then links to what is actually perhaps one of the biggest barriers, which is around leadership. So you don't get a receptive context with clearly established values without having that stability of leadership. And so what we discovered as we did the evaluation was that where we had organizations with what we call a receptive context, and where there had been cultural work, so this doesn't happen by accident, this was a deliberate attempt to align values right across the organization over a period of time. Those organizations, we saw that doctors, nurses, they grasped the methods, the enthusiasm for these methods and for delivering improvement was far greater. So we got traction far quicker and easier in those organizations than in others. So I think that would be, to answer your question, the biggest barrier for me, as I understand it, is around leadership. And in the NHS, historically, having stability of leadership hasn't been as strong as it should be. I think that's changing, but I think that is an issue that we need to look at for this type of transformation.
That's so great to hear, and thank you for kicking us off and jumping right in to some of these topics and issues. Gary, what would you add to that maybe is similar or in addition to what Nicola mentioned?
Well, I certainly would agree with Nicola. The leadership is critical, and it was one of the eye openers, so to speak, for me to realize the relatively short tenure of chief executives in the NHS. And so early on, as we were doing this work in the NHS and with other clients around the world, we really were insistent that if we really were to engage in a transformational body of work over more than 1 year period of time, that it required commitment from the C-suite. The chief executive needed to be engaged and needed to commit to sticking with it over a period of time, because constancy of leadership, a shared vision, critically important. The other thing I would add is, particularly in today's world, we hear this often, we already have a full plate. There's already too much to do. We don't have room for this work. And to me, my response to that is actually we can't afford not to do it for just that reason, because your workday or your calendar, your diary is actually filled with waste. And if we actually are objective about it and try to step back, how do we spend our time as leaders? Are we actually spinning our wheels or actually focused on things that matter? And when we begin to take the waste off of our plates, we free up capacity to engage in truly transformative work. So I think that's critically important. There are many other factors that go into healthcare, the conflict between being a cottage industry and really looking at systematic approaches to change our way of working. But I think if we have the right leadership in place, we really have a great start to move forward and can tear down many of the common barriers to adoption.
Great, thank you for adding that. I want to give Andy and Kathy and Adam an opportunity if you'd want to add some commentary to that. And again, the question was around what do you believe the biggest challenges to embarking on this work would be? We also did, I see in the chat, get a question from, it looks like Arnold. Can you prepare the ground so you become open to this new way? So Adam or Andy, it looks like Andy has his mic off, so maybe we'll start there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just on the just on the leadership stability point of view, and I certainly when we first came into this program, working alongside colleagues at the Virginia Mason Institute, I was asked that question on occasions. So, you know, this is going to be a 5-year program. Obviously, now 7.5 years on, but this is going to be a 5-year program. Do you intend sticking this out as chief executive? And I remember on the 3 times I was asked that question, saying, well, actually, anybody who's in my position in the NHS will say to you, it's not always in our gift that we get to stay that long, but absolutely I intend to. So I think it's the right thing to do. And I think it is really important. I'm sure we'll come on to that later. In terms of preparing the ground, I think what Nicola said has been proven right, where we've seen the different way working has landed in different organisations. In my organisation, we'd already started to work on the fact we'd created a new vision just a couple of years before we started this programme. And that vision was well understood within the organisation. We'd launched a organisation development programme, which started to say, well, for example, the importance of leadership, leaders at each and every level of the organisation across the whole organisation. And then when we started to understand in a greater depth about what Virginia Mason had done, what they were achieving, and what their methodology and the importance of a management system, we said this helps us. We very quickly saw, actually, this could help us get to where we already want to get to in a quicker, accelerated way by giving us the right tools, but also more importantly, actually, doing even more on the cultural side of the organisation, the cultural development about what that means. And so I think you can prepare the ground by thinking about, have you got that shared vision? Have you got leaders who are all into that? And actually really being clear about how this can help you get to where you want to get to.
Great, thank you for that, Andy. It looks like Kathy might have something to add, and Adam. So how about if we go in that order, Kathy and then Adam?
Yes, thank you. I agree with everything that others have said, but I would just add a little on the leadership front. I think it's absolutely important that the executive are behind this, but I also think the whole of the board is important to have buy-in to this, because I remember something that Gary once said. Quite a few of your words, Gary, have stuck with me, but there we are, is that the board had your back when you were doing this in the early days, and that felt really important. And where I see this not work or start and fade away is where perhaps the whole of the board don't understand what this really means. And it's not just, you know, short-term targets and meeting standards in that way, but actually it's putting faith in and allowing, another phrase that is often used by Virginia Mason is fail forward fast, allowing the teams to do something and maybe not be successful, but actually keep going. And then the other thing I would say is, in this space, is I think role modeling as leaders. And one of the things that our trust did, the leaders went on the program, on the Lean for Leaders training program, and I think that was really important, and that consistency. You know, when we had our days together on a Friday, you know, in everybody come together. I'm sure we'll come on to this, but you know, they're really committed to this and role modeled that commitment, not just said about it, but I think those things are hugely important and seem to be very impactful. Thank you.
And I was just going to add a little bit on that, kind of preparing the ground, because it's very pertinent for my organisation at the moment. We're in the process of choosing a partner to work with. But I think for me, I've been in the trust almost a year now. I started 1st of January, but through the recruitment process, I was very clear with the organisation that this would be my view of how we would run the trust. I'm really lucky to have a supportive board, a chair who is completely behind me on this, and started honest conversations with the executive team to say that, as Kathy says, the entire executive have got to be buying into this. I guess at worst, you've got to have people who are a bit not sure, but some of the trust, there was a sense of some execs were actively pushing against it. And I was really clear, again, learning some of the lessons from some of the stories that Gary told about early days at Virginia Mason of, there might have to be people leave the organisation. Not because they're bad, but because they're just not going to enjoy working in this way. So I think there's something around that, making sure people are kind of signed up to the fact that this isn't, from day one going to be perfect and there's going to be rocky times. And the other thing I guess I'm doing at the moment is trying to introduce some of the thoughts and the concepts to the organisation without them realising it's part of a kind of lean management system. So we talk about structuring a number of things in A3 thinking. We talk about waste reduction rather than cost improvement necessarily. We're pushing to see where do we really get the patient centered in the work we're trying to do and understand value. So I think there are ways you can start to build a bit of energy and tension so that when you really embrace this, people go, I now realize we didn't realize that was part of a system. So I think there are some smart ways you can start the journey almost on day minus 100 rather than waiting until you really get into the work.
Oh, that's so great. I really appreciate that around the behaviors and the language that we use and the kind of creating that community of improvement. I think each one of you mentioned leadership in this question. And so I want to go a little deeper in that space. It's been said it begins and ends with leadership, right? And we all talk about the need for leaders and executives to really think about their leadership styles. So maybe going a little bit deeper, thinking about this, and what support do you think leaders need today to sort of make this shift? Some of what you've talked about, the role modeling, a bit of behavior of how we use language and we communicate and we create that buy-in. What kind of support do you think leaders need today, or for you personally on your journey? What kind of support have you appreciated moving forward? Who'd like to begin with that one? Andy?
Yeah, I'm happy to, absolutely. Because I definitely have benefited from the sensile coaching approach that colleagues from Virginia Mason took to us as a chief exec and the rest of the wider executive team. And just stopping to make you think about what you do every day and talk about behaviours. And we all know as leaders that what we do and all the things we don't do is observed very closely. And so when I started to talk about standard work, that I have standard work as the chief executive, people started, what does that mean? But people know where I am. So at certain times of the week, so 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I do stand up. I hear from colleagues across the whole organisation what improvement work they've been doing. They see I'm there. We talked to, it's been touched on, the monthly trust guiding board Kathy mentioned, that everybody knew that's where I would be on that third Friday of the month because it was really important to me. But I think that the biggest challenge was the fact that many of us got to our leadership positions because we were relatively good at different times in our career at solving problems and getting stuck in and finding those solutions. And one of the biggest challenges for all of us is the fact you actually need to stop solving problems, but as a leader to frame the problem and to actually be able to step back and help colleagues who are actually doing the job day in, day out, frame a problem so they can solve them. And talk about sayings and language. And one saying I use every day is, those who do the work know the work, those who know the work can improve the work. But actually standing back and letting people do that rather than getting stuck in. And I've heard Gary talk about the end of superhero leadership. Absolutely agree. We all think we're fantastic, don't we? We can solve every problem. But actually, no, the people who do the work can solve those problems instead. And actually, people seeing you do that is really powerful. I say at the same time as people knowing exactly where you're going to be because you really attach an importance to this work.
Well, thank you for that. Very well said. Adam, it sounds like you're going to add something and then we'll go to Kathy.
Yeah, I think a couple of very, very brief dimensions. One's allied a bit to what Andy said. So, and we may well talk about the guiding board later on, but basically for those that don't know, it was the 5 chief execs meeting with Kathy and myself and a coach from Virginia Mason, and we spoke through. And what was really interesting in the transition at the beginning, we would go and do report outs every month and people would describe the projects they were working on. There was a real sense of the first chief exec would tell their story and what they'd achieved, and the next one would have to tell a slightly better story. And by the time you got to the 5th one, Michael Wilson from Surrey and Sussex or whatever would be describing solving the Middle East crisis or world hunger. And there was, you just saw a sense of the way that 5 very experienced, successful chief executives were kind of almost conditioned that we had to tell a good story, particularly when you were in the offices of the regulator. And we spoke a lot about the regulator. And even though I would constantly say we are a body that does regulation, but we also do other stuff, there was a sense of expectation. So I think in question of support, I think what NHS-I through that model and you know, behaviours and whatever were able to move. So very over time, but it didn't take too long, the chief exec started to want to tell stories of where they were struggling, and others were jumping in and say, well, I could probably link you in with someone on that and whatever. So there was a shift in leadership style from almost an expectation, soon as you walk into Wellington House, you need to be able to, on every bit of detail, tell a really positive story, through to one that says, you know what, this is something we're working on and we're finding it really hard. And so I think that that kind of support from the national bodies to create an environment where leaders can say, we can't tell you all the detail. As Andy says, we haven't solved every problem, but we're grappling with that. So there's something at level. And the other frame I would put is briefly is that the support from your own internal improvement team. So Andy spoke about the sensei coaching and the value of that, but each of the trust had a KPO, Kaizen Promotion Office, with some people who became increasingly expert. And I think in the same way that you'd listen to your finance director and be guided on finance, or your medical director, actually making sure that you do rely on your trained internal specialists and allow them to coach you and challenge you so that you can get better as a leader.
Great, thank you for that. I'm seeing a couple, we're gonna go to Kathy and then Gary, and I'm also seeing a couple questions in the chat around how do we gently nudge or push people, leaders, from simply talking the walk to walking the walk. So I'm gonna throw that in there. And then coming back after that, Nicola, there is a question about application of this work beyond individual system or trust in the question about the ICSs. The integrated care systems. And so just maybe when we circle back after Kathy and Gary, you can touch on that piece around transferability. All right, Kathy.
So yes, and so on the leadership behaviours things, if I can build on Andy and Adam's comments, is I think that you have to change from a leadership of kind of transmit to receive. And another of the things I think we learned a lot about was having big eyes, big ears and small mouths, and being curious and, you know, just sort of listening more. And I think as Andy has highlighted as well, and I think that was quite a big thing. And it was quite hard to do when you've spent a life of, you know, kind of talking about things, to actually listen to others and accept that people do know what to do. Your job as a leader is to enable, is to think about walking in their shoes, but ask, what are the barriers I can remove that would help you be the best you can be and improve the thing that you're working on? So I think that's important. If I might just comment very quickly on the integrated care system one, because I chair an integrated care board, so I have an interest in this. I've already talked in my system about we need to have, do we not need to have an improvement approach across the whole system? So I think it absolutely applies. And in fact, I think there was a little bit of endeavoured experience within the programme to try and look at that. But I do think that absolutely that this could be done. I think it would not be without its challenges, because you need to engage many organisations, many leaders in different bits of the system. into it. But I think it would absolutely be a possibility.
So I'm next. Thank you. I want to reinforce what's been said about the critical role of governance. The boards are critical, and they represent the communities. They actually, I believe, are an under-leveraged lever for organizations on improvement, and are critical that the support of the board is visible as senior leaders lead large-scale change, because change is difficult, and healthcare has actually been identified as one of the most change-averse industries. We don't want to change if we don't have to change, so we need that support, we need that impetus. I also think that if we go back to some of the principles of adaptive change and the human dimensions of change, and realize how important a sense of urgency is, once that urgency is created, there's an expression, American expression, let the cat out of the bag. It's already then too late to stop it. And so continuing to champion, or continuing to make visible that sense of urgency is important. I think having early adopters and opinion leaders as champions is critical to support leaders in this work. And then finally, get back to where we came from. When we talk about leaders and what they need in the way of support, I think we're talking about leaders at all levels in the organization. And what they need is they need constancy of support from the most senior leaders, articulating the vision, being on the Gemba or shop floor or wards or clinical and in the clinical environment. And that support is really, in my mind, non-negotiable. It's essential to success. And then I know Nicola's going to address this, but I think just having this group of people here from diverse trusts in different geographies, and you could talk to people in other countries that have also moved forward in similar fashion, the scalability of this is huge. And I think the curiosity, frankly, of the NHS right now is at a very high level as to what could be possible. And that's why we're so grateful for the objective Warwick Business School report to actually take a step back, no real skin in the game, and taking a look at what's been accomplished and what's possible. Because unless we aspire to what's possible, we're going to be stuck in the same environment we've always been in. And so I think as I go towards my late stages of my career, I'm very optimistic about the potential to scale this more broadly, including in the NHS.
That's great. So if we could go to Nicola, that comment says Gary was talking about scalability and transferability. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I share your optimism, Gary and Kathy. I certainly think there is there are lessons that we can take forward that can sort of translate this into ICSs. And I was having a conversation just yesterday, actually, with an associate director of improvement of one of our healthcare systems in the local area, and she was telling me how she had struggled to get the ICB and the ICS. So this is integrated care boards and integrated care systems for those who aren't in the UK. She was struggling to get people to understand the role of quality improvement across the region within the ICB and ICSs. And what she told me was that she'd taken, I'll just hold this up. So I've done what's called a sketch note. I don't know if you can see that. You obviously can't read it. But the point is what we've done from the evaluation through the report, we've then distilled 6 sort of key lessons and turned it into a sketch note, which makes it really accessible. Now, obviously, that's not this is how to do it, but it's starting the conversation. So what she told me at length is how she was using these 6 principles of how to foster a culture of continuous improvement to spark conversations with people who she'd struggled to engage in the past, so that we're not talking about quality improvement as something that we do on the side or when we've got a bit of time, that actually we need to be thinking about building cultural readiness, establishing our values, and then talking about developing capability, establishing routines and things like that, so that you're making it an accessible language in which you can have a conversation around it and start moving in the right direction. So I think there's there's obviously applicability, and I think there's a lot of potential, and I'm optimistic and I look forward to seeing how that plays out.
Great, thank you for that. I see Andy has a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo the optimism from Gary and Nicola, and it's exactly what we're looking to do here in Coventry within our place, our ICS, actually Coventry, Warwickshire. Within the place or the city of Coventry, we're looking to have a city-wide for health and social care improvement system. And actually, partners have been very receptive to it. Some people have said exactly as Gary said, oh, I haven't got time to do that. But when you start to talk about, this is about reducing the waste for all of our times, and so we can actually really focus on the people who need us and give them as much time as possibly can. People are starting to come alive to it. And the easiest example is that we know that whenever patients move between different providers of care, there is waste, there's duplication, and people are repeating their details. They have to go through to different practitioners, explain what they've explained several times before. And we want to make, if we talk about creating seamless pathways of care for anybody who's within Coventry, people get that seeing and using these tools like we've done within the acute hospital can make a big difference and free up the precious time of all of our colleagues wherever they sit within the system to give better care. So actually, I'm really optimistic.
Thank you for that. I love the optimism I'm hearing from this group. One of the questions that we got in the chat was a bit around the support from Virginia Mason Institute. And I kind of just want to go there for a moment and perhaps hear from those of you who experienced this, but it was around having a local name for the program, or is it a VMI sort of brand name for each of you? And I know each of you have taken this and tried to make it your own, which we highly encourage, that it is about making it your own. But kind of that question around having, bringing in outside support can be hard. Is there value in that? And then maybe sharing a little bit about how you make this your own. Who would like to jump in on that one? All right, Adam, thank you.
I'm happy to kick off. So I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? We can be quite guilty in the NHS of thinking anybody from outside is on the dark side, and we're the Luke Skywalkers of the world, as it were. But the reality is, what VM brought was genuine expertise, but also brought a sense of humility in their work, and credibility. And I think, particularly in my old role, I was always getting messages from people saying they've got a silver bullet that's going to save the NHS. And I would often say, well, go and work with a trust and get the chief executive of the trust to be telling everybody how great it is. And I think Virginia Mason had that ability because they could demonstrate taking a concept from industry, Toyota and other manufacturing, making it work in health. And they worked with us. So I think there is a value in having a bit of that. People have been and walked the path before you. But what was also very interesting, and again, it was an NHS thing, and we saw it play out in a bit of the guiding board. Can you just tell us the answer so we can adopt it? And the message was very much, no, you've got to walk the path and find your own way. And I think getting that balance of people who will, if you literally imagine walking along a kind of a cliff path, you want someone there to guide you who's been there before, but actually they're not going to carry you. You're gonna have to do it. So I think there is some real value in having that external voice. And I'm really impressed. I was lucky enough on one of my trips to Seattle to be there when the sensei came over from Japan, and it was fascinating for an organization that had been working on this probably 13 years or whatever at the time. The deference they made to this individual because they realized there was something to learn with fresh eyes, a different perspective, and coaching. So I think that's very powerful. But then I do think what you can't do is work on a program for 3 or 5 years and have it all, this is the Virginia Mason way. And I think there was an encouragement to say, no, own this, brand it, going back to the specific question about branding. And if I think of Barking, Havering and Redbridge, although in many respects they've moved on and probably not got as much benefit, they still talk about the Pride Way. And it's very much owned as part of their organisation, and the principles remain. But if the partnership had ended with Virginia Mason, or people had got to the end of the relationship, to have it the Virginia Mason, you know, at Coventry and Warwickshire would have not really worked. So I think a real sense of owning it, making sure the language works for people in your organisation, because I saw it working this way, and it definitely happened, is during the kind of relationship. At first, Virginia Mason were very much having to hold everybody's hand. And we got to the point, even in the guiding board, less and less did you need them in the room because of that transfer of knowledge and competence. And I think that's, the branding's really important, so that when, you know, Virginia Mason walk off to their next client somewhere else, actually the organisation really own it and see it as their management system rather than something that's been adopted.
Oh, that's so great. I think, Andy, did you have something to add, and then we'll go to Gary?
Yeah, please, just to build on Adam's points. I mean, firstly, it's interesting. So as I went through that quite challenging process to be chosen as one of the partners of Virginia Mason here in the UK, I was very clear that actually I wasn't looking to recreate a Virginia Mason in Coventry or Rugby, where my two hospitals was. This was about, as mentioned earlier, it was about accelerating where we wanted to go to as an organisation. And for that very reason, we very quickly came with our own name. I say our own improvement system, what became our management system over time. But just to build on some of the strengths of having outside support, it is about the credibility of what Virginia Mason had achieved, as Adam said, having those people with experience from all different backgrounds. And of course, within a hospital, you have so many different disciplines, so many different professions, but having people from every one of those have been shown how they have adapted their ways of working, that they have the use of the tools every day and have changed their ways of interacting with each other. So, and then the SEND side, the coaches, bringing outside eyes and challenges, just observing us and actually teaching us to observe rather than get stuck in. And then just saying, okay, how could you have done that differently? And as Adam says, that decreases over time, but actually we still have SEND-side come to our individual guiding teams now on a regular basis. And we still value that input and that challenge, holding the mirror up to us from people who have been through this. And so I think if we'd have just read the books about Virginia Mason, we wouldn't be here today. You need those people side by side, challenging you, guiding you, etc. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. Gary?
Yeah, so just a couple comments. I agree, and it's actually affirming, and feels good to hear the comments from our colleagues in the UK. Our philosophy at Virginia Mason Institute is quite different than most so-called lean consultancies. We actually believe in self-sufficiency, and basically our objective from day one is to have people make it their own, that sense of ownership, branding, but also to not make some of the same mistakes that we made over the last 21 years. And so within 3 to 5 years, we would expect people to be in their own way, in their own environment, you know, at that point where it becomes self-sufficient. Now, even Virginia Mason, 21 years into this, we embrace our senseis. And so as Andy and Adam know, I saw Nicola as well, I was recently in the UK. That was a fabulous opportunity to ask questions, to participate in ways that just made VMI and our thinking available. And I think that's the spirit in which we approach this work. And I think you have all taken it and run with it and made it special for your own organizations.
Thank you for that. Kathy, did you want to add something?
Just really to support what I said, I think it was interesting seeing how each of the different organisations had made it their own and had their own words for it. But there was also a consistency there. So, you know, I would definitely support that they did take it into their own thing. And you know, I think that feels really important in terms of ongoing, but also you could see the development, but also how it was important to have that input from VMI as well. And I think when it came to the monthly meetings, it was always great to have that input, because it brought a different view. And the longevity bit that Gary was talked about, you know, whatever year we were up to in terms of his journey, it was always giving you hope that actually you were in this for the long term. So you did need something that everybody would recognise and hang on to. So yeah, very much support that.
No, thank you for that. I kind of want to bring us back to the report just for a minute. And Nicola, maybe with you in terms of, I know we've talked about transformation guiding boards with some of the comments that several of you have made, but maybe giving a little bit of insight on your evaluative eyes on that, to kind of just start that discussion on the impact potentially of that. And then I'd love to hear from others as well.
Yeah, sure. So I made some notes as well as I was listening to others talking about it. So I think Adam and Andy have described it a little bit, which is fantastic. And Adam, I think you mentioned the peer support, and you know, everyone came primed to tell their story. So telling a good story, celebrating what we've done, sharing it together, but also being able to say, we're finding this really challenging, and having those honest and frank conversations that are constructive was absolutely amazing. And I think, and I don't know whether Cathy remembers, but I interviewed her at one stage and I asked her about the TGB, and she said to me, Nicola, sometimes when you sat there, I feel like I've got my conscience on my shoulder. So I sat in these meetings and they were 6 hours long, so a long time. And if you're a chief exec or senior leader within the organisation, generally that's not what you want to be doing. You don't want to be spending 6 hours of a day in a room. There's no windows in this room with your regulator. But as our chief execs would attest to, it was the best day of the month. And you mentioned, you know, that I would absolutely be there every third Friday of the month. It was very important to me. And that's because it was a safe relational space. And I think that's really important. And I saw in the chat, someone had mentioned Amy Edmondson, who talks about psychological safety. And that was clearly evident in this space. I don't think it was there at the beginning. I think it evolved over time as our participants, our chief exec, members of the regulator or NHS Improvement, built trust over time. And that came from having those conversations, from coming, being accountable to one another. So accountability was important. And I think it's important thinking about sort of any kind of partnership with ICBs as well. You know, you have to have a degree of accountability. You can't just presume that people will do things, but it has to sit in the background. So, and it does that by building up social capital within the room. So sharing stories, supporting one another, and doing it in a sort of a predictable fashion. So I think that's another one of the observations that I made, was that it was quite predictable. So you knew that every third Friday in the month you would turn up and the meeting would start in a certain way, it would follow a particular pattern. Each of the chief execs would report out. It was formulaic, but it didn't feel rigid or structured. It was a natural sort of flow of conversation that was fantastic. The other really important thing I think we need to mention was that the meeting, or the Transformation Guiding Board, was underpinned by something called a compact. And the compact was, if you're not familiar with what a compact is, it was created at the start of the partnership, and it was the result of a deep discussion about, you know, our responsibilities and what we expect of each other. And I'm sure Gary will explain this perhaps in a bit more detail about the compact. But having this documented that said that these are the responsibilities of the regulator, and these are the responsibilities of the CEOs on a piece of paper, it doesn't sound much, but I think the conversations that led to the creation of that piece of paper was really important. But to stop it from becoming just, you know, a document full of promises, and these are the things that we say that we're going to do, you have to keep it alive. So you have to keep referencing it. And this is what we saw happening through the Transformation Guiding Board, is that the compact had, it was a standing agenda item. So at the end of each meeting, there would be reflections around the room. So everybody that was at the table, including myself, had to sort of just only for a minute, just talk about, what they had valued from the meeting. And what that did was it reaffirmed the shared vision of the partnership. So each week, what we're saying is, this is what we're doing, this is what we're here for, and we're going to continue in this journey. And it's, we're going in the right direction. So that was really important, because if you think in any kind of relationship, when things are going right, we don't tend to notice it. But having that on the agenda and every week saying this is what's going well was really important for the ongoing sustainability of that relationship. The second thing that the compact did was it allowed participants to call out when something hadn't happened in the way that we would expect it to happen. Okay, so if, for instance, the regulator had behaved in a way that wasn't aligned to the expectations that were agreed at the beginning of the partnership. And that's important because it then provided an opportunity to manage conflict. And I think it's important to say that in any relationship partnership, you need trust and you need a mechanism for managing conflict. And that is what the compact did really, really well. So I'll stop there and let others comment.
So great. I see Gary's hand is up. And thank you, Nicola. You highlighted some of those key pieces from that report, and I really encourage people to read it if they have not yet. But it looks like Gary and then Adam.
So as Nicola said, the compact was foundational, but was truly remarkable for me to watch and to from the sidelines and to encourage was the partnership between the government and the delivery system. Now, I know the terms are different between, the central leadership of the NHS, the guiding board that came together with the 5 chief executives. And because over so many years now, 15 years working in the UK, as somebody says in the chat, the NHS being hostage, that's the word in the chat, to politics and political issues. So this was very breakthrough, governed by a compact, a reciprocal agreement of what the trust could expect from the government with the government, the funders of this work could expect from the trusts. And the level of candor, I believe, was unprecedented and was a critical component to the success of this work. I do think, to answer a question, I've had recent conversations with Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy is very proud of his tenure as Secretary of State for Health and beginning this work. I congratulated him on his new role, and he said, yes, but when they cut me open, I will still bleed patient safety. It was, his way of saying that his heart was still in this work. And I think that highlighting this in the Warwick Business School report will be helpful in doing so in the highest levels of the government can potentially lead to more scale and spread in ways that will add value, and most importantly, for patients, communities, and lower the total cost of care, which we are all working on around the world. So just a few comments.
Great, thank you, Gary. Adam.
Yeah, just very briefly, I want to just pick up on maybe another dimension of the meetings, because in many respects it was quite countercultural, as has been mentioned by Nicola, in terms of, again, regulator, provider. Normally when you came to Wellington House, it was with a pack to talk through why you weren't performing and wondering what sanctions would be put in place. But I think as well as talking about quality improvement and continuous improvement side of it, what really came through to me very strongly was the respect element of lean. And that ranged from some very practical things like, again, completely countercultural, people being told off if they went anywhere near a device. And it very clearly got to the point of, no, you leave your phones. It's disrespectful for those presenting if you're sitting on your phone. And to see 5 chief execs and national leaders who at any point of view potentially wondering what's going on back at the ranch or in Westminster, that's tension. But actually it was really well followed. And I think actually all credit to Kathy, because I was lucky in my role at NHSI that improvement was my thing, and therefore to say I block this day out once a month becomes quite easy. Kathy had CQC conversations, Secretary of State conversations, and lots of demands. And we spoke about other members of the NHSI leadership joining the group, but they couldn't commit. And so we said, well, not interested. But I think the chief execs felt the respect that Kathy showed them by knowing how busy her diary was in actually committing to do it. And I think it was really important that we lived and breathed what we were trying to learn and teach and work through in showing respect to each other, as well as then going back to our organizations and showing those principles.
That's so great, Adam. Thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, but I want the rest of you to be thinking we're nearing the end of our session. And so we're going into the lightning round, which we're going to ask each of you in less than a minute time frame each, one last takeaway that you'd like to leave your colleagues and those on the call today with us. So one last takeaway, about under a minute, lightning round. And with that, Kathy, this isn't your question, this is your comment to the last question, but we'll have you do the lightning round as well.
Thank you, and thank you, Adam, for those nice comments. So on the guiding board, why was it successful and so on? And I think the compact was important, but then I think that consistency of being together and genuinely listening and caring. And one interesting thing that we've really not mentioned is it did survive some changes. So some of the chief execs changed, and some of the leadership from NHS Improvement, previously Trust Development Authority, did change. But somehow we managed to keep that going. But I do think that absolute commitment, and I can remember that some of the chief execs would have their own, end of the week RPIW readout, etc., on the day, and they would come still to London and would do it by electronic, do it by video in order to keep with it. And there were no real reasons except for being ill or on holiday abroad or something that you didn't come, and everybody stuck to that. And I think it felt really, really important, because there was a question, what on earth is the point of NHS Improvement in all of this? And I think I observed that it was bringing people together, kind of giving them a reason why they would keep consistently coming together. But actually they wanted to, because, as I say, it was a great day. And it was a great day for me, I have to say, as well, of the month. I looked forward to it. I often said that at the time. I looked forward to it just as much as everyone else. So yeah, it was great.
Oh, thank you for that. Such important comments, and love that. All right, so this is the lightning round, and looking for a brave volunteer who'd like to go first in their 1 minute or less.
Okay, I'm happy to attempt this task then. So, I mean, basically, fundamentally, this programme, where we've got to over the last 7.5 years, has changed my organisation for good. It's not going back. It's here to stay, and actually I'm confident that I'll be here to stay if I was to leave today, because it's so embedded in the organisation, and actually I'd be really proud of that as a legacy. It was central to how we took on the challenge of the pandemic by having this embedded as a methodology, as being the way, our management system. We had empowered colleagues at every level of the organisation who had tools to make the changes they needed to make, and people felt they had permission to do those changes, to learn fast, but also because often that came from failing fast, but then moving on to trying to always be better. And quite simply, this is now the way we run our organisation, and it's our management system, and it's how we look to constantly improve what we do for our patients each and every day.
Shall I jump in next? So my successor at NHS, I often use the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think, not that I want to steal his catchphrases, but the reality is, I think that the trust progressed better and deeper in their learning because they were doing it as a group, and they were very willing to share and link in. And I noticed in the attendees, 1 or 2 people from KPOs are here, and I think they will also reflect that they were well linked. They had a network, they had a WhatsApp group, they could chat with each other. Some of them visited each other and provided support. The beauty, and why I share the optimism that people describe, so many people are now getting into this work. The number of trusts working with VM, there's some vital science trusts going, There's others working with other people working with this at the core. And one of the key principles is that willingness to share and come and look and help us get better. And I think anyone looking to go on this journey could really take on some of those principles of reach out for help, offer sharing when people are looking for it. And it will allow us as an NHS, addressing one or two of the comments we've not really got to in the chat around how do we kind of fight against the politics and the ICS changes and NHSE and CQC sacking chief execs, all that kind of stuff. I think if we do it as a group, we've got a real opportunity to make this deeper and stronger in its application.
Perfect. That's so great. How about Kathy or Nicola?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I mean, I'm going to say something pretty brief, really, is I think my advice would be, if anybody hasn't done something like this, and you've read this, you've listened to this, you've thought about it, I would be brave and go for it, because it is transformational. And then, having decided to do it, you know, get the whole leadership on at all levels on board and stick with it. And but don't give anybody a thought that it'll all be done in a year. This is a journey that's going to, you know, a lifetime really. But the benefits, because it puts the patients at the heart of things, it puts the client, the patient, whoever you're delivering for, absolutely at the heart of it, and that is key. So I would say, don't hang back, go for it.
So I think that turns to me next. So I think I would just leave you with the thought about the relational side of change. And I think we've talked about it in passing sort of through all of our responses. And certainly when we talk about the TGB, it does highlight the relational nature of this work. And I think it's really important to remember that. So we need the technical capabilities. We need to learn how to apply the tools and all of that malarkey, but we will not lead improvement in a systematic manner across an organization unless we understand that this is about connectedness, about being connected to others, talking about improvement, talking about change. So that's a really important element of this work. And it ties in also with the point that was made about respect and respect being absolutely fundamental. But sadly, often overlooked element of lean methodologies, I think, but it's really important.
I guess that falls to me next and last. I want to express gratitude. We are grateful for the partnership with our colleagues in the NHS. We're grateful for the ongoing nature of the partnership and how together we can work to potentially continue the process and continue the change across farther and wider across our healthcare systems. When I'm asked by skeptics, as I often am, you know, what's this about? Isn't this just about cost cutting? I say to them, can you please share with me something else, another approach that will improve quality, improve safety, improve the patient experience, create unprecedented staff engagement and empowerment, and lower cost? Because if you can come up with that, I want to listen. I want to learn. But so far, nobody else has come up with another way forward. And so I think that's what this is about. It's about providing hope for all of us and all of our colleagues around the world that went into healthcare to make a difference for our patients, for our communities. And in today's world where hope is a rare commodity and for many, I think the opportunities here are enormous. So I'm very excited about the future and look forward to more collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you all. So we've had some wonderful comments in the chats. I hope everyone gets a chance to see that. Very inspirational comments in the chats as well from our participants. So to the panelists today, I just want to say thank you for your time, your enthusiasm, your willingness to share your experiences and your perspective and your learning with us. Really, really valuable. So thank you for that. To the audience, I want to say thank you for joining as an audience member. You will receive a follow-up email with the recording as well as links to the report. We hope you'll take time to read the report. It really outlines very, very well the lessons around culture, leadership, cross-organizational collaboration, and that peer-to-peer thing that Nicola was sharing as well at the end, and some of the lessons that we can take to heart, showing that a new way of working together is possible. And I'm going to end with a quote that I love of Dr. Kaplan's, which he shared in relationship to the report when it came out. And he said, "When we come to the table willing to learn and transform, beginning with ourselves, the result is powerful." And so I want to thank all of you for coming to the table today. And on behalf of the panelists and myself, have a wonderful day.